Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Jerry Ann Higgins, and I'd like to welcome you to the UVM Health Network Healthsouce presentation of how to overcome overwhelm this holiday season. Healthsouce is a free educational program that offers classes on a wide variety of health and well-being topics, led by our UVM Health Network experts. Tonight, we're being joined by experts from Champlain Valley Physicians Hospital in Plattsburgh, New York, and Central Vermont Medical Center in Berlin, Vermont. I'd like to now introduce you to our two experts, Dr. Aaron Stewart of CVPH and Dr. Jeremiah Eckhouse of Central Vermont Medical Center. Aaron Stewart, PhD, is the Chief of Psychology and Interim Assistant Medical Director for the Department of Psychiatry at Champlain Valley Physicians Hospital. Dr. Stewart joined CVPH as Chief of Psychology in May 2019. Dr. Stewart has been instrumental in helping to create the CVPH Critical Incident Debrief Team to build and support a resilient culture by reducing vicarious and secondary trauma. A forensic psychologist, Dr. Stewart specializes in reduction of aggression and violence, limiting maladaptive behaviors in patients, and trauma prevention and intervention. Dr. Jeremiah Eckhouse received his MD from the Drexel University College of Medicine in Philadelphia. He is board certified by the American Board of Family Practice and the American Board of Holistic Medicine. Dr. Eckhouse has a special interest in holistic and integrative medicine. Dr. Eckhouse's patient-centered approach to medicine focuses on all aspects of the human experience, taking into account the biological, psychospiritual, relational, and cultural health of individuals. He uses a combination of Western medicine, nutritional counseling, herbs, vitamins, supplements, guided imagery, acupuncture, and mindfulness-based therapies to optimize the health of his patients. I'd like to now formally invite Dr. Stewart and Eckhouse to officially begin our How to Overcome Overwhelm this holiday season presentation. Welcome.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Well, let's go ahead and get started with the slides. We have a brief presentation, and then as Jerry Ann said, we'll take some questions. So we'll go ahead and get the slide presentation up here. I just want to, on behalf of Dr. Stewart and myself, I want to thank you, Jerry Ann, for that warm introduction. And I want to thank all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to be with us this evening. This time of the year poses some challenges with the busyness of kids getting back to school and activities, days becoming shorter and colder, fall and winter holidays, and over the past 2 years, there have also been many added stressors because of the pandemic. We know that in this short time together, we will probably not be able to address all of these challenges, but we wanted to share what we hope are some tips and tricks to dealing with some of the more common issues that we are all facing right now. Next slide. So our objectives for this evening, we will explain the impact of the pandemic on symptoms of hypervigilance, anxiety, and depression, describe the physical and mental symptoms of stress and learn how to recognize them, understand the need to shift from getting support from others to getting support from within during times of strained resources, explore strategies that promote internal coping mechanisms and apply them to your own life, and participate in a guided practice beginning to build a toolbox that supports personal well-being. Next slide.
What we know is that in order to learn about some of these tools, we have to be able to keep our frontal lobe and our cognition fully on board. And in order to do that, we have to stay in what's considered the pocket, the threshold of the right amount of anxiety, which gives us the right amount of motivation and doesn't make us too concerned or worried or fearful. And so what Dr. Eckhouse and I would like you to do is, if you feel yourself getting concerned or worried, and we're going to talk some about depression and anxiety, and it might bring something up for you, we want you to apply a self-care tool. Take a short break, try to remind yourself to stay present, or use some sort of sensory tool to keep yourself present and grounded. And that will keep you in the pocket of learning and engaged and interested and motivated. And it's a parallel process. So you're going to practice it here and then also apply it when you feel worried or concerned in your life. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Erin. So I think everyone is aware that the world is currently experiencing the largest isolation experiment in human history. We wanted to talk briefly about the impact of the pandemic on 4 things. Those are hypervigilance, anxiety, depression, and something we call re-entry. I think most people are probably aware that the COVID-19 pandemic is an ongoing global stressor. And research published in January of 2021, just recently, has shown that stress can elicit post-traumatic stress disorder-like responses and exacerbate pre-existing mental health problems like anxiety and depression. At least 580,000 Americans have died from COVID-19, and this official tally probably omits hundreds of thousands of uncounted deaths. Because each death leaves an average of 9 close relatives bereaved, we know that roughly 5 million Americans have been grieving parents, children, siblings, spouses, or grandparents at a time when funerals, bedside goodbyes, and other rituals of mourning and loss have been disrupted. The combination of isolation, fear, social distancing, grief, and worry has caused an increase in mental health symptoms, specifically hypervigilance, anxiety, and depression. Next slide, please.
So Jeremiah used some important words. Some you may have heard and some you may not have. So we just wanted to break those down for you and tell you what it looks like when you see these things. So hypervigilance is a big word for being ready for anything. And it looks like we are attempting to predict adverse outcomes by being prepared. It also looks like a hyper focus on what could happen rather than on what is happening. It also looks like an increased body function for preparedness, which are our fight, flight, freeze, startle response and threat prevention response. So you might feel your hands sweating, or your chest, you might be breathing heavy, or you might feel muscle tension. Your body is ready when you're hypervigilant for anything. And it feels like we're remaining in crisis. Next slide, please. And we've all heard this word a 1,000 times, but it really means something in response to re-entry. People are feeling more anxiety than they were prior to the pandemic. They're reporting it more, we're seeing it more, and it's presenting more. So what actually does that mean? It means a persistent and chronic feeling of worry. It means a stronger and more severe fear reaction to a situation that you might not have had that reaction to before. It means an impairment in sleep or eating, and it means perceiving your surrounding environment with impending doom or dread. So it's different than hypervigilance, but it is a general sense of worry that peaks and valleys. Next slide, please. And lastly, we're seeing a lot more depression. And we all have our own individual understanding of what this means, but if we break it down, it's an ongoing sadness or a low mood and potentially tearfulness. It's a lack of ability to find joy or pleasure in previously pleasurable activities that we loved before. It's a lack of motivation or interest, an impairment in sleep or eating, and it's perceiving the surrounding environment with impending doom or dread. And I want you to notice that on the anxiety slide and on the depression slide, those last 2 things, sleep and eating and impending doom or dread, are the same. And so anxiety and depression go hand in hand for a lot of us. And the hypervigilance is also presenting at a much higher rate. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Erin, for those excellent definitions. Just a quick word about re-entry. So after periods of isolation, it can be difficult to re-enter society. It kind of reminds me of some of the studies that were done on the physiological and psychological effects of isolation during early polar expeditions or space missions. And in those studies, people went crazy when alone for too long. When re-entering social situations, some people are anxious about getting COVID, while others are anxious because they are just out of practice socializing. So there are some tips and tricks that we recommend with re-entry. And the first is to start small. In other words, think of a way to socialize that's not too big. Pick something small, like meeting with a friend, for example. And the other tip is just to start soon. So there's something to be said for ripping the Band-Aid off. And in this case, we recommend just going ahead and starting. And the last one is to buddy up. And this is always helpful. Find someone else who may be struggling or is interested in getting back into socializing again, and see if you can do it together safely. Next slide, please.
And when you engage in re-entry by starting small, starting soon, and buddying up, you might feel signs and symptoms of stress, and that is normal. We've never done this before. We've never re-entered post a pandemic. And so your body and your brain will tell you that this is unfamiliar and will give you signals that this is stressful, and that's normal. We wanted you to know what some of those are, because sometimes signs and symptoms of stress, if they're not validated or noticed or observed, they can get bigger and bigger. So if you go back to, there they are. So aches and pains in your body, a tight chest, hard time catching your breath, tingling, temperature fluctuations, digestive problems, those are all things that are happening in your body. In terms of how you're feeling emotionally or mentally, you might experience mood fluctuations that you haven't experienced before. That's your body telling you this is hard, this is new. So preoccupation, perseveration, feelings of impending doom, sadness, anger, worry, and difficulty relaxing or calming. We expect that you will see some of these, and that's okay. We just want you to know what you're seeing so you can figure out what to do next. And we'll give you some of those tools. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Erin. That's great. And we also just wanted to mention, I think most people are probably aware of this as well, but we currently have a very strained healthcare system. When helpers and healers quit their jobs, we lose capacity to take care of others. During the pandemic, people have put off surgeries, checkups, physicals, and preventative care, and now are realizing that they can't wait any longer. That, combined with a lack of capacity, has really created a difficult situation. We have an increase in demand for services and a lack of access, and I think most people have probably seen that. We also have a situation where many healthcare workers are burned out, and there's a lot of stress on the healthcare system. Additionally, some of our community-based social support systems that we typically had in place prior to the pandemic have been put on hold, and that has increased the acuity of the needs that people have. So we just wanted you to be aware that, and I'm sure most of you are, that we have a strained healthcare system, and that's part of this. Next slide, please.
So we've told you all of the things to set the stage for overwhelm and for the season getting cold and the season preparing for family events and holiday. But now we get to tell you the good news, which is that we are built to survive and thrive post adversity. As humans, we have a lot of tools to bounce back and stand back up again after we have a challenge or a hardship. And so for the rest of the presentation, we're going to talk to you about what we know as resiliency, which is the word that we use to describe that ability to bounce back after adversity. And we chose some images of natural experiences of resiliency, which involve creativity and adaptability and ingenuity and flexibility, which we can also do as humans, is grow something out of nothing or grow something out of hardship. It is known as post-traumatic growth rather than post-traumatic stress. And so we'll tell you about resiliency and what some specific tools and tricks are that help you be more resilient.
Love that idea, Erin, of post-traumatic growth. That's just awesome. And I love that picture. We have the next slide, please. Thanks. So we're going to talk a little bit and explore some coping strategies that we have found to be helpful at reducing stress. There are many other strategies, and we're not going to cover all of them today. Because each individual person is different, it can be helpful to explore several strategies to find what works best for you. This evening, we're going to cover topics of mindfulness, gratitude, boundary setting, healthy relationships, and humor. Next slide, please. So you may have heard of this thing called mindfulness. What is it and how can it help you? Well, mindfulness is paying attention to the present moment in a non-judgmental way. Research shows that mindfulness meditation can be helpful for many health problems, including the impacts of stress. Some tips and tricks for mindfulness. Number one, stay focused on the present moment by returning when the mind wanders. Most stress is generated by past or future thinking. Have some self-compassion. It is sometimes difficult to stay in the present moment, so cut yourself some slack. You're going to hear these themes coming through, but practice in short increments to start and buddy up. Again, don't bite off more than you can chew, and find a friend, find someone that can help support you in learning something new. Next slide, please. So we wanted to include some resources for each of these coping strategies. And as we go through, you'll see slides with resources and links to resources. There is just tons of stuff out there to help support you in learning some of these techniques. So here are some resources for mindfulness. Next slide. And now we wanted to just take a few minutes to give you an opportunity to experience some mindfulness. So we're going to listen to a short audio recording. I think you might recognize the voice.
I would like to invite you now to join me in this brief mindful breathing exercise. Let's begin by finding a place where you can sit, stand, or lie down in a comfortable position with as few distractions as possible. Now, adjusting your posture so that your spine is straight, imagine a string pulling up on the back of your head, bringing your spine into alignment. You are welcome to close your eyes or leave them open. Let's begin now by bringing your attention and awareness to your breathing. Noticing the sensations of the in-breath and the out-breath. Without trying to change your breath in any way, just allowing it to move naturally in whatever way it wants to. Noticing where in your body you feel your breath the most. Is it the air moving across the nostrils, the back of the nose, the throat, the chest, the belly? Noticing if you can feel the temperature of the air you are breathing, the movement of the body, or other sensations associated with breathing. Noticing if there is any tendency to pass judgment on your breathing or this exercise. Much of our human experience is riddled with praise or criticism, but here we are inviting you to suspend judgment. After all, there are no awesome breaths or wimpy breaths. There is no right way to breathe or wrong way to breathe. there is just the natural rhythm of the inhalation and the exhalation, and your mind observing. Now settling your attention again on the place where you notice your breath the most. See if you can maintain your attention there, even between the breaths. Perceiving any sensations that you feel just prior to an in-breath and just after an out-breath. Noticing the sensations through the entire cycle of breathing. Let's stay here for a moment, just observing. From time to time, as you focus on the sensations of breathing, you may observe your mind wandering. You may become aware of a thought or a feeling, a discomfort, a memory, a something on your to-do list. This is normal. Our minds are made to think, ruminate, predict, feel, and even to lose focus. But our minds are also made to be fully in the present moment. So if and when these other things arise in your consciousness, just notice their presence, and then gently guiding your attention back to your breathing. Spending a few moments now just noticing the sensation of your breath and your mind noticing your breathing. Bringing your attention back each time it wanders, with a gentle and kind hand. Much as you might guide a puppy who is learning to walk beside you. Each time your mind wanders, guiding it back to noticing your breathing.
Thank you, Jeremiah. That was wonderful. So one of the other tools that we wanted to remind you of, if you already know, and give to you if you don't, is that the literature suggests that spending time each day in gratitude is helpful for our brain to feel more well in challenging or crisis situations or difficulty. So our tips and tricks are, and this takes practice. This is a gratitude practice, not a gratitude product. So it's more over time that you'll acquire the ability to do this, but it's shifting the thinking from what's missing to what is already present. And we gave you an example, which is, I wish I had more friends, becomes I have one great friend, and being grateful and having gratitude for that. Gratitude also looks like giving permission to difficult experiences and feelings while attempting to positively reframe that. So that's validating our experience while also trying to shift the way we perceive it. Looking for the post-traumatic growth opportunities in all of the adversity that we experience shifts the focus away from what feels miserable to what did I learn from that? And focusing on what my skills and strengths are that I already have shifts the brain to a gratitude perspective. And so we would encourage that this is a tool you can practice on your own, with a group, with your family, at your desk. Next slide, please. We similarly to mindfulness gave you some resources that you will be able to further investigate on your own time. Again, this takes time. When I started practicing gratitude, it was hard. And similarly to mindfulness, when I started practicing mindfulness, it was really hard for me. So this takes time. Next slide, please. And we wanted to briefly touch on setting boundaries because it helps contain your energy and contain the risk for fatigue in situations that are already compilations of stress, like it's getting cold outside, it's getting dark outside, we're preparing for family events and holidays. So we have to set boundaries. And for some of us, that's harder. For some of us, it's easier, but we all have to do new and different things in reentry from the pandemic. So the tips and tricks for setting boundaries are saying no as a default, considering it your no over time, and then maybe opting back in with a yes if you want to. Focusing on protecting at least 5 minutes of every hour. And you could start with 1 minute and build up, but trying to conserve at least a little bit of time every hour for yourself. Conserving energy every day for yourself. Routinely and building in, checking in to gauge capacity and make decisions accordingly. So we have to ask ourselves, how do we feel? How much energy do we have? How much capacity do we have? And make decisions about what you do and don't do accordingly. And letting go of fear of being unliked by saying no and setting boundaries to preserve yourself. Next slide, please. We gave you some resources that you can check out on your own, that the links will be in the chat. So you can look at them on your own time. They're to help you slowly learn how to set more and better boundaries. Next slide, please. So lastly, we wanted to touch on healthy relationships, and the tips and tricks for healthy relationships are to number one, most important, top of your list, start with self-compassion to support being connected with others. And this is kind of nonsensical. It looks like I'm thinking about myself when I'm trying to connect to others. We start with having compassion for ourselves so that we're available for connection with others. Remembering relationships often are the source of harm, but that means, and the positive reframe is, they're also available to be the mechanism for healing and recovery. Planfully and thoughtfully spending time together, experimenting with coping skills as a buddy system, exercising outside together, even when it gets cold, choosing friends and loved ones and using help from a support person or a trusted picker, meaning bounce your ideas off somebody else about who you're spending your time with. Our sensory mechanisms are always gathering information and always on board. And so we have to be careful about who we see, what we hear, what we smell, what we taste, and what we touch. Start with shared integrity or values as a way of choosing your healthy relationships. And as a recommendation, we would always recommend that you opt out of alcohol and substances as a way of connecting. This leaves the relationship as having less depth and less connection. Next slide, please. Again, there's resources for you when you have time to read more and listen more about healthy relationships. It's always a good place to start for preventing challenge and preventing adversity to put the right people around you. Next slide, please.
So Aaron, those are some great tips and tricks, and I know I'm learning just listening to you now. I think we can all learn some of those things and try some of those things. So I'm going to talk about one more coping strategy here, which is humor. And I have to couch this with, first of all, dad jokes are how I roll. And I want to let you know that I am the father of two now teenage daughters. I've been told many, many times that my jokes are not funny. So bear with me here. Usually this is accompanied by an expression similar to the one you see in this picture. But we know that laughter and humor are great ways to diffuse stress and cope with challenges. So I thought I would share a couple of my favorite dad jokes with you, and then you can let me know if these are funny at all. All right, so here we go. The first one, the other day, my daughter screeched at me. She said, "Dad, you haven't listened to one word I've said, have you?" And I replied, "What a strange way to start a conversation." The second one, here we go. Did you hear about the restaurant on the moon? It's great food, but no atmosphere. Yeah, I know, it's terrible, right? All right, the third one, my dad is getting older. I didn't want to believe that he was stealing from his job as a traffic cop, but when I got home, all the signs were there. You're either like laughing right now or you just want me to stop. I've got a couple more though. So last night I had a dream that I weighed less than 1,000th of a gram. I was like, OMG. Get it? 0 mg. Okay. I love the dorky ones too. All right, the last joke here. Let's see. The last joke I have is actually not a dad joke. So just a quarantine joke. Here we go. So quarantine has turned us into our pet dogs, right? We roam the house all day looking for food. We are told no if we get too close to strangers, and we get really excited about car rides. All right, that's all I've got. Next slide. So laughter is the best medicine. There's a lot of research on how humor and laughter can increase endorphins and stimulate our immune system. In fact, just smiling can release these powerful brain and nervous system chemicals. So some tips and tricks: smile more. Even if it doesn't feel natural, you can just smile in the mirror and it actually will help to release those chemicals in your brain. Take a step back. Value extremes. So look for things that are extreme and then just think about the humor of them. Like, how could this possibly happen? Again, buddy up and then watch funny shows or read funny books. These are some of the tips and tricks that we recommend to stimulating humor. And I hope that at least one person laughed or smiled about my terrible jokes. All right, we do have some, next slide, please. We do have some resources that you can check out and some links. And next slide. I think that's all we've got for the presentation part of this. And we're going to open things up to questions. And I believe I want to thank you all. First of all, I want to thank you for listening. We really hope that you enjoyed this presentation and found it helpful. And I'm going to turn it over now to Jerry Ann, and we will take some questions.
All right. Well, thank you so much, both of you, for such an informative presentation on such an important topic. I will say that I use a lot of those tips and tricks. My husband and I do three things every night. And sometimes his is, I woke up breathing. And I'm like, well, that is very important. Also, I know with re-entry, I'm an extrovert, and I definitely had some social anxiety coming on in. So that was very real, and I can have a lot of compassion for folks who aren't extroverts. And then the dad jokes, well done. Well done. I did have a question about when you attend the holiday gatherings, and if you're feeling anxious actually at the gathering, what is a tip or trick you could do? Could it be something like excuse yourself to the bathroom or do some breathing exercises? And please, either of you chime in.
Do you want to take that one, Erin?
Do you want to take it, or you want me to go first?
Why don't you go first?
So, Jerry, and the first thing I would say about that is that I want people to think about before they go to the family event, what might be hard about it, and plan around those things. So for some people, it's some of the topics that come up at family events. And then, when those topics come up, you got to go take a break, you got to breathe, you got to do all the things that you just suggested. But it's important to planfully prepare for what might be hard. And that at least gets you started. And then you get there and something happens that you didn't plan for, and you have your coping skills in your back pocket, which you suggested 2 of them. But I would also suggest taking a buddy and having somebody that who knows you there, so you can give a signal or make a wink or something that you're starting to feel it, that you're starting to feel the experience. But I hope that people will think about what is hard about the family and what is hard about the cold and what is hard about the holidays, so that they don't feel caught off guard and out of their element, because we know what is going to be hard a lot of the times.
Thank you. I did have a comment here that there was someone named Jean who said she did laugh out loud at the dad jokes, or groaned. And she might have groaned at a couple. So one question we have is, how do I cope with my family when they are stuck in the negative and I'm on my own trying to feel better?
Yeah, I can relate to that. I think that sometimes negativity can be contagious, right? And so it's important to first notice that that's what's happening. And that's where, for me, the mindfulness kind of comes into play, because mindfulness, again, is about paying attention to what's happening. And that includes how we're feeling, our emotions, and what's coming up for us. And so just being aware and noticing that that's happening, I think, is the first step. And then, trying to turn negatives into positives is a little bit of a trick, but Erin can probably talk a little bit more about this, but she mentioned in one of the slides something called reframing. And I think that reframing is an incredible skill to have. It reminds me of a story that I once heard. I'll just share with you really quickly, which is a reframe story. And it's a true story, but it's been handed down so many different times and passed on that I can't tell you if it's exactly correct. But I've heard this story that a physician actually was working with a patient. And this patient was an older patient who had had a stroke. And unfortunately, suddenly this person did not have use of their dominant hand. So in this case, it was their right hand. They couldn't use their right hand. And that made it very difficult to eat. And this woman, she made a comment, and the physician remembered it and then told the story, and I heard it, which was, "Oh gosh darn it, I can't use my right hand. I've always wanted to learn how to use my left hand to eat." And she picked up the spoon with her left hand and started eating with her left hand. So that's just an example of a reframe where you take something that's potentially very negative, very challenging, and you just reframe it and think about what's the positive, even if it's something as silly as I'm going to learn how to use my left hand now. So that's an example. Erin, do you have anything else you can add to that?
Marianne, I would say that one of the deeper skills, which we didn't get to give tonight, but that I am often teaching people, is to mentally not take on somebody else's suffering when they're expressing it. And it's a skill that therapists and doctors and psychologists have to acquire during their training so that they can continue to work. But it's a skill that I often teach my patients and my clients, where if somebody's expressing something to me, that is their experience, and I don't have to own it. I don't have to feel it. I don't have to value their belief system, but I can still hear them. And that's what I do with my family. It's what I do with all of my work. And so taking some mental distance from somebody else's experience keeps that boundary inside my heart and inside my mind, is what I would say.
Okay, great suggestions. We have a couple of more questions coming in. One is, how do I'm so frustrated by everything these days, everything. I seem to now have a short fuse and don't know why. How can I do better?
Normal, first and foremost, is that
Self-compassion, right?
yes, everybody I speak to is saying that they are that they have less bandwidth than they've ever had before, and less stress tolerance and less distress tolerance. And so that's really normal. So the first thing I would say is try your hardest to not have self-judgment about the fact that you feel triggered by a lot of things and don't have a lot of bandwidth. That is to be expected for right now. And what I would say about why it's happening is because our brains are built to deal with threats and challenges that last very brief periods of time. So that's what we're really good at. We're really good at responding quickly in stressful situations. We did not prepare for longitudinal stressors that last forever. And so those feel like a gazillion tiny little stressors all on top of each other. And that's why you're feeling that way. It's normal. And if you can have a little bit of self-compassion and less self-judgment about that experience, it will feel better. Even though it won't go away, it will feel better in the moment, is what I would say. Jeremiah, do you have other things you wanted to say to this?
No, I mean, I'm just going to echo what you said, Erin. I think that was well said. I agree with you. You know, I think everyone is kind of feeling that to some degree right now. And you know, for me, it's about figuring out what are your things that really help you when you feel frustrated, and really kind of taking an inventory of those things and exploring which things are most accessible to you when you're really frustrated. So, you know, for me personally, that's maybe just noticing my breathing, or I might distract or something like that. So something that's very easy for you to do. Take a few deep breaths, go for a quick walk, you know, something like that. I think knowing what your coping strategies are, knowing which ones work best for you in situations where you're frustrated can be helpful.
Great, thank you. We did have a question of folks asking about the resources with the links in them, and I did just want to let everyone know that those of you attending on Zoom, you will get a copy of that via email, and then those of you watching on Facebook Live, that will be posted in the comment section there. So you will be receiving those very, very helpful links. We had two more questions come in. One is about mindfulness, and mindfulness, what is a good length for mindfulness practice? Does it have to be like 20 minutes, a half hour, an hour? Could it be shorter?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you, Jerry Ann. And thank you for the for the audience member who posed that question. I think it's a great question, and I'm going to say that mindfulness can be any length of time, from the briefest second to as long as you can possibly think of. But I do recommend starting small. So, short, brief mindfulness practices can be much more accessible and are easier to do. And there's a lot of options, a lot of resources online for brief mindfulness meditations. The mindfulness exercise that we did this evening, you may not realize, but it was actually probably only about 6 minutes long.
Mm.
So it was pretty short. And it's sometimes, to me anyway, it sometimes feels like it's longer than it is. And that may just be because I'm watching my mind struggle a little bit. But in 5 minutes, you can actually do a pretty nice mindfulness exercise and get some benefit from that. So anything from 5 minutes, one minute to start, 5 minutes, but then working up to 20 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever you're comfortable with.
Great. That's wonderful. 1 minute is I mean, that's so accessible. So and
Jerry, the literature suggests that 1 minute a day reduces depression and anxiety after a period of 6 weeks. So this is a fast re-up of mood that happens when you settle yourself for very brief periods of time. So as you get better and better, you can extend your practice and remain mindful in hard moments, but the preventative mindfulness also has a deep impact on our feelings.
Great. Love the research there, the tidbit. We have a couple more. One is, I had a stressful day and my husband said to take deep breaths. We were talking about breathing earlier. I had to leave to get my COVID booster, and while driving, I tried doing deep breathing. When I got home, I told my husband it didn't seem to help, but he said, you can't multitask to relax. Thoughts?
First of all, I as the father and husband here, I'll say that was a very brave thing to say. Take deep breaths. Always have to be a little bit careful about. I was sure it was well intended, but it's important to recognize that everyone responds differently to different coping strategies, and so taking deep breaths might work very well for one person, but it might not be the thing for someone else. Yeah, Erin, do you have some thoughts about that one?
The only thing I would say is that I've learned over a very long time trying to calm people down that it works better for people if you give them a recipe of choices, and not all at the same time, but bits and pieces of choices for people to try on. And so what you might find is that breathing works tomorrow, but it didn't work when you were in the car. And it might work because you tell yourself to do it, not because your husband suggests it. And so these coping skills it has to be an individualized and personalized plan, and that changes over time depending on how you feel and what you're being escalated by. So what you want to do is find out what works for you and practice them when you're calmish, when you're in that pocket, so you can have them ready to pull out when you most need them. That way nobody has to tell you what you should try or practice, because sometimes that feels hard when you're having a hard time.
Thank you. All right, there are less community resources for clients, patients in need of housing, food, healthcare, mental health care, and before the pandemic, then before the pandemic, and the holidays seem to make things even harder. What exactly do you do to remain effectively caring and compassionate as a health worker without taking on others' suffering? So about boundaries, I imagine.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start, and then I'm sure, Erin, you'll have some good ideas about this. But I've been practicing medicine now for 20 years, almost 20 years, and I will say that this is a skill that I've had to practice every day and continue to work on. It's very challenging because as human beings, we are naturally empathic. We care about others, and when we see suffering, when we experience other suffering, we do naturally want to take that on. So I think as Erin mentioned, learning how to listen and be empathetic without taking that suffering on to ourselves is really the trick. But it's a lot harder than it sounds. And so I think, again, like with many of these things, kind of starting with something small and trying to learn how to do that with maybe something that's a little bit easier. Yeah, Erin, what do you help me out here? What other kinds of things can you think of that would be helpful?
I wonder if this person is asking us, and so I will answer from a perspective of me. This year in particular, I am going to opt out of many of the family holiday events in my family of origin. And that is a choice that's taken a lot of consideration and thought. The other thing I'm doing is trying to embed happy and joyful things in times that might be hard. So thinking about what kind of food I would want to have, who I would want to be around, and giving myself something to look forward to in preparation for feeling better when things get hard. I'm drinking a lot of water and a lot of seltzer to try to stay hydrated. And I'm being really careful about making sure I go to sleep at a reasonable time so that I'm not stacking the deck against myself with fatigue. I would agree with Jeremiah that in 15 years in the field, I've never seen anything like this before. I've never seen it. And I've never seen my employees struggle in the way that they're struggling. I've never seen my patients struggle in the way they're struggling. I have never struggled in the way that I'm struggling to stand up every single day and keep up the energy and keep up the endurance. And so I would just say this is a time when we have to practice extra and more self-care strategies that other people might think are radical or over the top, and that's okay too. So those are the things I'm currently doing. And the other thing that I'm doing that is really working for me is I'm trying to take snapshots of my day when I see something joyful or pleasurable and remember them and go back through them like a photo reel before bed. So the smiles or the joy or the feelings of connection, I'm trying to remember them as images and go back through them before bed.
Those are great. Those are great, Erin. Thank you for bringing in that personal perspective as well. And I'll just add, you triggered some thoughts in my mind as well. I'll just add that, one of the things that we've done at my office is we started on a whiteboard. We just kind of started a place where people can put something that happened during their day that was valuable to them. So it was a positive experience, or they felt like they made a difference in someone else's life, and just put it on the board so that everyone can share those with each other. The other thing that I've been doing is I've been doing a lot of mini meditations because haven't had as much time to practice longer meditations. So mini meditations for me is, Erin mentioned taking 5 minutes out of every hour. Well, for me, those 5 minutes are precious. If I can get a breathing exercise in or something like that, that really helps me through my day. Taking short walks, just getting outside, spending time with a pet, just all those things that you have that are nourishing for you, making sure that you're doing those things.
Great suggestions. Thank you. Thank you both so much. We do not have any more questions, and we are just about at time. So this will formally conclude our presentation. We want to thank both Dr. Stewart and Eckhouse for sharing their expertise, the wonderful suggestions, and the slides and resources with the links that you will be getting via email if you were attending via Zoom. Otherwise, it will be posted on the UVM Health Network pages. We'd like to extend a friendly reminder to please take our survey, which you'll receive right away. For our Facebook Live attendees, we'll be sharing that in the chat. Zoom attendees will receive over email. And on behalf of the University of Vermont Health Network, I'd like to thank you both again. And I would like to thank the attendees for their interest and participation. We hope you'll join us for another class sometime soon. You can visit uvmhealth.org/healthsource for more information about our upcoming webinars. Thank you again, Dr. Stewart and Eckhouse.